Today we are going to be looking at finding the maximum and or minimum of a quadratic. Okay, so it's just going to depend on what type of quadratic we have. So the first thing we need to decide is how we know if a quadratic has a maximum or if it has a minimum. So when we were using Desmos to graph quadratics, we should have noticed one of two things is happening when we were graphing it. Okay, we either noticed that we got a U-shaped graph that looked like it opened upwards this direction, or that opened downwards in this direction. Okay, if we are getting a U-shaped graph that opens upwards, that means that our A value is going to be greater than 0. Okay, so if we think about numbers that are greater than 0, 1, 2, 3.5, 7, right? Those are all positive numbers. So this tells us that A is a positive number. Okay, if we get a parabola that's opening downwards, right, that U-shaped graph that's opening downwards, that tells us that A is less than 0. And the type of numbers that are less than 0, right, are negative. So it means that A is going to be negative. Now, when the parabola is opening upwards, not only do we know that we have A being greater than 0, and so A is positive, we also can tell by looking at this graph that we have sort of this low point graph, right? It continues going up to the left, it continues going up to the right, but we have this low point. Okay, that low point here is a minimum. Whereas if our parabola opens the other direction, right here, we have a high point. And so if our parabola opens this direction, we call it a maximum. Now, regardless of whether we are talking about a minimum or a maximum, that high point or low point on the quadratic, on that parabola, is called the vertex. Okay, that vertex is the very middle of that parabola. So it's either the maximum or it is the minimum, depending on which way the parabola opens. Now, to get that maximum or minimum, to calculate the vertex, okay, so if this is sort of like a coordinate plane here or whatever, I'm just going to sort of draw a picture, and we have a parabola graphed here. Mathematically, to calculate that maximum or minimum, to calculate that vertex, we're going to use a formula. Okay, it is an ordered pair to find that point. To find the x value, which is always the first value of an ordered pair, we'll use x equals negative b over 2a. It's got a little bit of that resemblance to the quadratic formula going on in there. To find the y value that goes with it, okay, we are going to have to plug the x back in to the original equation. This is an x, not a very good one, but this is an x. Okay, where the x value is sort of always telling us where it's at, the minimum or maximum, and the y value is always sort of telling us then what that value is. So let's look at an example here. Let's say we are given y equals 2x squared minus 10x plus 28. We already know how to do some things, right? We could use the Desmos calculator to graph this and to find our zeros, right? Which would tell us what x equals. Okay, we also now have just learned that by looking at the a value, we can determine if the parabola opens up or if it opens down. So our a value on this one is 2. We should already know how to identify a from the quadratic formula. So we said when our a value is positive, we have a parabola that opens up. So we know we have a parabola that's going this way. and we know that it is going to have a minimum. So we can then calculate what this vertex is by first finding the x value. We said to find the x value, we would do negative b over 2a. Okay, so just like we did with the quadratic formula, a is 2, b is negative 10, c is 28. So if I plug this into negative b over 2a, the negative of negative 10 will be positive 10 over 2 times 2, right? Because a is 2. So that then tells me 10 over 4. And then whether you use a calculator, whether you reduce it, whatever, we get that our x value is 5 over 2, or for most of you, since you're decimal lovers, 2.5. Okay, so when I'm naming the ordered pair of this vertex, I know that my x value is 2.5. To find its corresponding y value, I'm then going to take this 2.5 that I just got, and I'm going to plug it in for x in my original equation. So every place that I see x, the x is coming out, and 2.5 is going in its place. So instead of saying 2 times x, I'm now going to say 2 times 2.5 squared minus 10 times 2.5 plus 28. At this point, you're just going to probably need to pick up a calculator. We have decimals, they're squared. Okay, we're going to get some large numbers here. So we'll do 2 parenthesis 2.5 close parenthesis squared minus 10 times, right? I'm typing this whole thing in my calculator. So 10 times 2.5 plus 28, and then we'll just hit equals, right? This is telling me what y equals. So that will now tell me y equals 15.5, 15.5. Okay, so I know that my vertex is at 2.5, comma 15.5. This is a parabola that opens up. Okay, where it is at the minimum is my x value. Okay, and what the value is the y value, which is 15.5. So when you're doing this in ALEKS today, just look at the questions carefully, because sometimes that order is flip-flopped. It will be the one that says x equals that you need to type the x value into. Okay, so let's look at one more example like this. Let's say we have y equals negative x squared plus 8x plus 18. Will this parabola open up or down? We should have picked down because our a value here is negative. Now we need to decide what we have, either a maximum or a minimum. So since this parabola we said opens down, will this have a maximum or will it have a minimum? We should have picked maximum because this has a peak at the top. So we can calculate this vertex, this maximum, by starting by calculating x equals negative b over 2a. What does b equal in this problem? Right, b equals 8. So we'll say negative 8 over 2 times, what does a equal in this problem? A is negative 1. So we'll have negative 8 over 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2. So our x value on this problem is 4. So for our vertex, our ordered pair of x comma y, our x value is going to be 4. What should we do with that 4 to calculate the y value? We're going to plug this in for x into the original problem. So every place we see x, it's getting replaced by 4. So we'll say y equals negative 4 squared. That negative does not go into the parentheses because it was part of the problem, not part of what I'm plugging in. Plus 8 times 4 plus 18. What value do we get when we plug this into our calculator? Okay, so when you typed this in, you should have typed it in just like you saw it, and we get an output value of 34. Okay, so this is a parabola that opens down. It has a maximum. Okay, where it is at its maximum is at 4. The value at its maximum is 34. Now let's take a look at how we can use this in a story problem. And I know my students read this problem and freak out, but let's just take a look. A factory produces lemon-scented air fresheners. They know that each unit is cheaper the more they make. They also know that costs will eventually go up if they make too many, right? This is due to storage and overstock. So this is a pretty real-world situation of what businesses are looking at. The accountant has told the company the formula, and it gives us the formula. Okay, this formula will give us the cost per number of air fresheners made. We want to find the number they should make to minimize their costs. So we know if we look at this equation that we're given, it's all we really need. Just looking at this highlighted equation is our important information. So we know by looking at A, which is 0.04, this is a parabola that opens up, which means it has a minimum, which is exactly what it wants us to find. Okay, where are we going to minimize the costs? To find that, we need to do x equals negative b over 2a. So b in this situation is negative 8.504. So if we start plugging this in to x equals negative b over 2a, we're going to start plugging it in exactly how we see it. So the negative of negative 8.504 is going to be positive 8.504 all over 2 times a, which is 0.04. So we're going to need our calculator on this one most likely. So 2 times 0.04 is going to give us a 0.08. And now we're going to divide. So 8.504 divided by 0.08 gives us 106.3. Okay, so we want to find the number they need to make to minimize their costs. This formula is telling us what C equals. If we were to plug that 106 back in, that would tell us the cost that it is, how much we're spending. We don't want to know the cost, we just want to know the number. So this is our answer. Now, in most situations, we're not going to be, we might have to consider rounding. And Alex, make sure you read the directions. It may or may not tell you to round. In this specific situation, we can't make a 0.3 of an air freshener, so it'd be somewhere around 106 air fresheners.